What's up, everyone? Welcome to the instant reaction show of day 2, Niners training camp. I'm Grant Cohn. I'm joined by Jordan. No, I can't point on this. Jordan Elliott, David Liechty. These two are 49ers journalists, analysts. Follow them on Twitter, and they were there today. They were watching from the stands, and we were just talking about, which is basically just as good of a view as I get. I get to move around, but they get to a little height, which actually I might want to get in the stands. But you got to pay for those tickets. Anyway, they saw it. They saw a lot, and I'd like to hear their impressions. You already heard mine. Let's start with the starting quarterback, quote unquote, Jimmy Garoppolo. What'd you guys see from him?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're talking about day 2 here. I thought day 1, both Lance and Garoppolo look sharp. We're going on Jimmy. Not to get hyperbolic, but no, Jimmy didn't have a good day. It was a lot of balls behind, a lot of balls batted down, balls dying. Like we kind of talked about, Jordan and I were talking about in practice. And this is always in between the numbers. He's pretty efficient at that. When it got outside the numbers, he falls apart. And I think that's something that we've seen. It was one practice, but no, I mean, just call a spade a spade. It wasn't one of his best.
I had him at 4 of 10 in the 11 on 11. So no, it's Jordan. What'd you see?
So I think I just saw what I've seen from Jimmy Garoppolo pretty much the entire time he's been a 49er. The throws over the middle, particularly, I thought his best throw was a drift route that looked like that he threw to Deebo Samuel. He's always looked good throwing between the hashes in that short to intermediate area.
When you say a drift route, what do you mean for the people watching?
So a drift route, essentially, it's an in-breaking route where you're going to run, I believe it's 10 yards or 6 steps. It varies. There are variations, but generally it's 10 yards or 6 steps, and then you break to the inside. So it's that middle of the area sweet spot where Jimmy has, for the most part, been an above-average NFL quarterback. When he's throwing between the hashes, particularly within, 15 yards or so of the line of scrimmage, I think he's more than adequate as a quarterback. It's when he's asked to throw outside that he really has a problem, and that's what stood out to me today. There was a couple throws, one in particular, it looked like it was about a 10, 12-yard out route to the left numbers, and he one-hopped it to the receiver, and it was just it was not a good throw. There's no other way to put it. It was not a good throw.
Yes. No, and we both looked at each other, and, you're like you said, you're watching all the quarterbacks, including Sudfeld and Rosen, and you could just – the fans in the seats even behind him, everybody had that same reaction. And nobody's out there actively rooting against or for more one or the other. It was just really evident that it was throw after throw after throw. And I think that if we want to kind of not abandon Jimmy here, but then hear what you have to say, Grant, but then like in context with comparing it to Lance, because that's what fans are going to do. That's what they want to see. And that's what some people are kind of a little reluctant to get into, is that Lance wasn't without his hiccups, but the mistakes that Lance may have made, I actually felt like oftentimes there were receivers that kind of failed him a little bit, and then his mistakes weren't something that were going to kill the team. They were going to result in turnovers. And he can afford to make those mistakes with the skills that he has, with the way the ball flies off his hand. We'll see how he go ahead.
Yeah, we'll talk about Lance next. I just wanted to put a bow on Jimmy real quick. Like, people talking about him like he's improved. And I think it's important that we're like letting fans know exactly what, like, he's still Jimmy Garoppolo. Everyone talking about Jimmy Garoppolo and Mohamed Sanu like they've had this rebirth at 30 years old. No, you've seen a lot of Jimmy Garoppolo. You know what to expect. He throws off his back foot. When he has to throw outside the numbers, the ball dies. He doesn't even really attempt throws down the field. And in the context of that little confine of space where he throws the ball, he's pretty good, but I feel like defenses are just kind of constricting him, and it's becoming harder and harder for him to work that area of the field, which is why Trey Lance is on the team, right? More or less?
Yeah, and I think, honestly, the biggest thing with Jimmy is that I think, he came up fired up to the podium yesterday. You saw it firsthand. He had that little bit of like a chip on his shoulder, I guess, and people were fired up. But as great as it is that he's, taking this challenge head on, it seems like, and he has that attitude, that doesn't change the fact that he still has a lot of deficiencies as a quarterback. And there's a reason why Kyle and the Brain Trust were willing to mortgage 3 years worth of first-round picks to take a chance on a guy like Lance. And it's not a matter of when, if Jimmy's gone, it's just a matter of when. And just being totally truthful, it's one day of camp. I don't want to read too much into it, but I saw the same old Jimmy, and I saw the exciting prospect of a guy that had a ball jumping out of his hands in Trey Lance. And it just, it's just the hourglass is running out. I don't know how much longer they can keep up this facade of Jimmy is our guy. He's the starting quarterback of this team.
Were you guys surprised to see Jimmy play the way he did today?
No, and I think that
Me neither.
like and this is the thing. It's not about. I think there's this fans sometimes misconstrue honest analysis with hate. And it's not that. It's like I want people to show up to camp and say, "Hey, what did you see?" Well, this is what I saw. And
Keep it
what
real.
like what Jordan said and what you had said, what we've seen before. And I've heard this trope, "Oh, well, Jimmy's never really a good practice quarterback." I'm like, "Well, I don't know what that means."
Yeah.
And my thing is there are going to be teams, we talked about this in practice. Teams are going to take away the outside. And it makes this team very, very hard to
So Hester's saying, Jimmy could be the best between the hash thrower in the league, but when defenses have only that to worry about, it's a problem.
No, and it's we've seen where that gets this team. And so I think the thing is this: the writing has been on the wall, and I think talking about that in a way makes it seem like people are like, oh, you don't know what the 49ers grand design is. I think as we transition to Trey Lance, one thing that's jumped out at me, because it has to be in this context, is that Trey has not necessarily been perfect. I actually think he's looked great. He does not look like a rookie. You would not know that he's a 21-year-old guy who's just been looking at this book for a couple months, and he's come in, he operates, he has command of the huddle. He's right on. To me, he's outplayed Jimmy in the first two practices.
Okay, let's talk Trey Lance.
Yeah.
What do you see from Trey? David, have you been at both practices?
I have, and I'm going to be there tomorrow. I'm going to be there tomorrow as well.
Good enough.
So, yeah, no, what I've seen from Trey, the first thing that stood up for me on day one is that, and I think Kyle was the first practice really kind of getting both quarterbacks outside of the pocket, trying to simulate some pressure where they're moving outside and have to improvise a little bit. Trey still makes the efficient throw. He's going to go to the read that's open, but he also takes risks, and not unnecessary risks, but going down field, and he had success with it. There was a play that was characterized as a jump ball yesterday. It was not.
To Kittle?
Yes.
Yeah.
It was a dime.
Yeah.
And I think that what you saw today, there were a couple hiccups or a couple throws where, a little bit behind the receiver, but he has the talent to make slight mistakes and still make good throws, where the defender wasn't. Like I said, a couple plays, I think Dwelly stopped on a route. I think Kevin White might have fallen down. Yeah. He would have been 8 for 10 instead of 6 for 10. Overall, not perfect, but he moved the sticks.
Yeah. Jordan, what'd you see?
So my whole thing with Trey Lance, and I've watched so much tape of him. I've watched pretty much every throw he made from the coaches, all 22. He just is a natural thrower of the football. That's the one thing I kept coming back to. He just looked like a guy. Like I told David when we were sitting in the stands, like even if he never played baseball in his life, if you put him out in like a rec softball league, I feel like this guy would be just a natural athlete throwing the ball, and it translates very well, if that makes sense. So I saw the ball jumping out of his hands, and it really felt like it was just like a natural gift that he had. But the thing that really stood out to me was that there is still the fact that he is the rookie, and he is going to have a tougher time transitioning. He hasn't had much time outside of OTAs, I imagine, with these guys in a structured, environment. So as much as I think he has this natural ability, just the throwing motion, the mechanics, everything looks very fluid, and it looks like it comes very easy to him. He's not forcing it. It's not awkward. I did think he was a little bit late on a couple throws. There was one in particular where he threw it behind Debo, and Debo had to go back to his back shoulder. He ended up making a catch, and Trey Lance has the arm strength to have that half second or so of hesitation where he might be off, and he still has the velocity to get it there, which is a luxury we've seen the 49ers haven't been afforded in recent years. If you missed that timing window that Shanahan would set up with his play call, the play was either going to be a turnover or it wasn't going anywhere. With Lance, I think they're afforded the ability a little bit to have that growing pain of him adjusting to timing and adjusting to his receivers and getting used to all that. So I think he was great, but I'm not going to sit here and act like I thought he was perfect. He definitely had some throws that I thought he could have worked on. He had a couple that sailed. There was one that sailed over I'm playing. I think it was Travis Benjamin, maybe over the middle. He threw it, 3-4 feet over his head. But it's minor things that will get better over time. You expect these things in the first couple of days of camp. If this is still happening after the third preseason game going into the regular season, then I think it's a much bigger issue that would need to be looked at.
Yeah, and one thing that I loved is that his worst throw was his first throw. That's the one that Jordan was talking about. And he didn't sit there and pout. He collected himself. You could tell he was like, that's on me. Went back and he went to work. One thing of both
the one to Ayuk.
Yeah. And one thing that stood out for me too, His footwork, he's cleaned up a lot. That was one thing that they were looking at with John Beck and wanted to work on that element of his game. It looks clean to me. His movement skills is fluid behind the line of scrimmage. He's confident. His demeanor in the huddle, he's commanding it with the way he comports himself. He does not look like a rookie. He looks like a guy who's earning his teammates' trust. And that's not hyperbolic praise. This is just 2 practices. But the fact that the first 2 practices, he's already looked like a serviceable starter in the NFL in a practice with these guys. And people say, well, he's not with the ones. He's with the skill position ones. He just doesn't give him the one offensive line. And when they put pads on, you're going to see the wrinkles that'll come out. We're only 2 practices in, but it's going to keep getting better.
Also, to be fair, he's not facing the first team defense either. That's something to keep in mind. But I think it's another thing to remember is that there just wasn't much film of Trey Lance. We've all watched the Trey Lance film. There's like 30 minutes of it. It's not a lot. And that was 2 years ago. And I think when you see him in person, you kind of struck by wow, it's a new person. He's a man now. And when you watch him, the arm strength always kind of makes whoa, I haven't seen anything like this on this field since Colin Kaepernick. But you guys saw Colin Kaepernick. I mean, I already feel like this guy is much more naturally gifted than Colin Kaepernick really was. That's how I felt.
Yeah, I mean, I won't slander Cap. I love Cap. I think that
you're Cap.
No, it's not. And I think the thing that's it's like that knee jerk reaction to say, hey guys, we're not slandering a guy because we're, but no, he's a more, like Kyle said, and Kyle does coach speak too. Yeah. No, it is. And he was the most pro ready quarterback in the draft. Kyle fell, by the way, what we're realizing is that Kyle was in love with Lance a lot longer than we thought.
Yeah.
All this stuff where he was hedging and on the fence. We were learning that's not true. And so I think that's what's impressed me the most is the way he comports himself, the way he's coming in there. He's not phased. Teammates seem to really love him right now. And of course, he's good at the mic. He's polished in PR. He's got that high character that just you're not going to phase him there. You're not going to catch him with a gotcha question. He's ready.
I wish he'd loosened up a little bit behind the mic, but that's what every rookie quarterback's like. You can't really talk out of turn like Jimmy over here dropping F-bombs. Can't really do that yet. That's okay. I understand.
And I think it's fair to point out too, it's obviously early and he hasn't really been tested with much adversity per se as in a Niners uniform. But I feel like he carries himself like a guy that you want to build your franchise around. He's somebody that I feel like has embraced the fact that he knows that the 49ers are a storied franchise, and it's been made pretty evident that they're banking on him to be the guy for the next decade or so. And he comes off to me as a guy who's not only, embracing that challenge, but welcomes it. And just his energy and his vibe walking around, and you know much better than me, Grant, but just the impression that I got was that he's a guy who really is just immersed and in love with this game. He loves being out there. And, that's one of the things I've always appreciated about Kittle is that even when they're out there in the first week with no pads on, these guys live for football. And I think
Warner was there for every OTA day. Yeah.
And that to me, those are the guys you want when you're paying them the big bucks and they're still willing to show up for the stuff that's voluntary. I think that does go a long way. And, culture is very cliche. It gets thrown around a lot, but I think that the culture that Lynch and Shanahan and that current regime have built has made the Niners a very desirable place for players that are premier players that have options to go elsewhere. And you can see it rubbing off even on rookies like Lance, in my opinion.
Dizza Scraps has a real quick question for us. He says, Jose Cortez ended the Mariucci era. Kyle Williams ended the Harbaugh era. What player position will end Shanahan?
Well, it would be, we've talked about this. It would be Trey Lance not succeeding.
Yeah.
I mean, we've got 2 future first round picks. It's, again, we know that the love is there. And if the love is, not rewarded with production in the first couple of years, that's what would do it. And I personally don't see that happening. There's always in the realm of possibilities. But that's it. I don't think there's any other player that has that level of influence on Shanahan.
Yeah, it's an easy question. Hester says something that also stuck out with Lance is his footwork, speed in those drills. Seems extremely fast and light in his feet despite being 220. Yeah. Also, Rosen seems pretty heavy-footed, huh?
I'll let Jordan take that one.
I am I'm all for them taking the flyer they took on Rosen, but yeah, he to me today. I mean, Sudfeld wasn't great either, so you could have gone either way. And Rosen, I agree with you. I think Rosen had the best single throw of the day.
It was a nice throw, right? But the rest of it was not a good day.
It was such a good throw that it kind of took. I was taken aback because yeah, and he's capable of those, but it's the 9 bad throws in between every one of those throws that makes it hard to get behind him, in my opinion. Because I know a lot of people want to move on from Jimmy right away, have Rosen backing up Lance.
Good point.
And the fact that they've been able to financially make it work with Jimmy, I don't know how they made the cap work. It seemed impossible to get all the deals done they did while retaining that $26.5 million salary. I can say, as somebody who definitely is for them moving on from Jimmy, I would much rather have Jimmy be in that building than risk having, in my opinion, a roster that can compete for the Super Bowl, and then you're stuck week 8 if Trey Lance gets hurt, particularly if you're going to be using him with designed running and he's going to be mobile and being a little bit more susceptible to injury than a traditional pocket quarterback. I would feel much better with Jimmy coming in. If Rosen comes in and he has to start 5 or 6 games, I'm not feeling great about this season. He doesn't have it, man.
I don't either. I will say this, though. I'm one of those guys from in draft season. We know that they were trying to move Jimmy. We know that was happening. They want to move on. Back in January going through. I will not be surprised, and I've said this, people think you're being hyperbolic about it. I'm just saying, please don't be surprised if some team gets a little desperate or some team finds value in having Jimmy come in. The 49ers will be prepared to move him. They will be prepared to move him.
Houston could be one of those teams. Houston could be one of those teams.
Absolutely, and they're not the only ones.
Right.
I mean, there's teams that want to compete. And the 49ers, they, like Jordan said, they made the salary cap work. So because this roster is so good and because this could be a Super Bowl contending team, and if they can afford to keep him this year and know he'll be off the books next year, great. However, if they find an opportunity to cash in while the selling point is high, I don't think Kyle's going to be afraid to do that. I don't think that's as crazy as it sounds.
But I'm with Jordan in the sense that it would really make you feel better about doing that if Rosen could show something, if Sudfeld could show something. And so far, these guys are getting like 4 throws a day, and neither one's tearing it up. And I like Rosen, and I can't say that. I can't sit here and say that he's tearing it up. He's not. He made one nice throw, though, and I'm going to remember it the rest of my life. What a throw. What a throw it was. I can picture it right now. All right, hold on. Let's move on and talk about enough quarterback stuff. Let's talk about the rookies. Every rookie except for Trey Lance. Let's give a quick rundown of what you guys think, starting with Aaron Banks, who had some one-on-one reps right in front of you today.
I thought that Banks looked good. My biggest thing, so when they announced that pick, I do a lot of draft stuff. I did hundreds of mock drafts, and I did not think the 49ers would touch a player of that size because typically Kyle, since he's been here, is like the more agile fleet of foot guards. The thing that really stood out to me with Banks is just his sheer size. He's a very large human, and I know the 49ers have a pretty big line on both sides. They are a bigger team, but the biggest thing for me with Banks is that he's so hard to move that I think the Niners got to a point where they knew that interior pass rush, and for anybody who can stomach it, if you go back to that Super Bowl they lost to the Chiefs, what really ate that team apart was they fell apart in pass protection on the interior at both guard positions and center. And I think that they were just at a point where they're like, we're making this investment in Trey Lance. Even if Jimmy's there to start the year, this team is so good. We need a guy that's not going to repeatedly get abused by interior defensive linemen. You have to think about them playing Aaron Donald twice a year. So I think that Aaron Banks is a guy that while his technique is very sound and he's very promising as a prospect, and I think he can be good in that zone blocking scheme, he's so big that I think he's just like when I went back and watched his tape, he very rarely got beat. And he not only was like rarely getting beat, he was punishing opposing 3-techs and nose tackles with ease. So my biggest thing with Aaron Banks is that I think he just gives them a size and kind of like a grittiness that I don't say they haven't had on the line because they've had Joe Staley. They obviously have Trent Williams now. But he gives them just like kind of like that Kinlaw effect the D-line had last year, where this guy is just such a massive human being that he's really going to clog the middle for them. So I thought he looked great out there today, and I thought he lived up to that kind of big bully reputation that he gave off when I watched his college film.
Yeah, and I'm not gonna reiterate any of those things that Jordan did an awesome job with that. I think the big thing is just like it was kind of interesting. Like the pick wasn't sexy at the time. Like I'm a draft junkie. I never mocked Aaron Banks in any mock, even when I'm doing it for fun. And one thing that I noticed is that he didn't stand out in practice in the way that he was standing out where he's making mistakes. And I think he's going to be. The other thing too is that his movement skills are really underrated. Everybody always talks about his size, but he does have the ability to move up and down the line. I thought, I don't think he's done anything in the last two practices to raise, red flags, and that's a good thing.
Interesting. I was watching him in one-on-ones today. I thought he was struggling with Armstead, Jones, Givens, I believe, but those guys are good too. And he's a rookie, and the pads aren't on yet, so you shouldn't make too much of the one-on-ones. And it was just one day. That's the only thing I saw. I felt that's a tough.
It's hard to gauge linemen on these no pad practices because these ideas of getting leverage is that you can't really do what you want to do in this place. And I think you saw a couple, there's a couple guys that like went a little off script and kind of did some hip checks today. And I think the coaches were like, whoa, stand back. So
I did see that. I was like, what was that? Yeah.
Yeah. So
that's not a move.
Right. So I think the jury is out, but I think he's going to be asked to contribute right away.
It's easier to rush when you have no pass rush. I mean, that's why you saw certain pass rushers have who's it? Michael Bennett would have nothing on his shoulders because there's less to grab and hold. So anyway, this is something I was a little hard on Aaron Banks today in my post. That's good context. Okay, how about Trey Sermon?
I thought that Trey Sermon, from what I saw, he was getting the majority of the first team reps. He was running with the first team, and then in 11-on-11s and 7-on-7s, it was the same. I thought he looked good. He has that kind of upright running style. It comes across a little stiff, in my opinion, but I think he does hit the hole with a little bit of explosiveness. He gives them a little bit of size that I feel like they don't have elsewhere in that running back room right now, where he kind of can play that kind of similar role to what Tevin Coleman played, where he's going to be that guy that's going to hit the hole with a little bit more power than anybody else really in the running back room. Truthfully, if we're talking rookie running backs, I thought Elijah Mitchell was the best running back on the field.
I do too.
He looked more explosive than anybody else on the field. And again, I'm not trying to read too much into it. They're not in pads yet. It's just, guys running around.
It's hard to judge running backs without tackling, but you can judge their explosion, their speed. It pops. It pops.
And he looks like he's the real deal. And I think what that does is it really gives them significant flexibility. Should Raheem Mostert get paid elsewhere this offseason, if he unfortunately suffers another injury this season, if anything happens to him for any amount of time, they have a guy that can replicate that speed, because I think that's one thing when he went out last year, you really saw that element of the offense disappear. And I think having Mitchell and having Sermon, you get these guys with young legs that are going to be able to come in. And because unfortunately, the reality is in the NFL, if you're a running back, very few are going to play through their second contract at the same level they'll play through the rookie deals. So if you can get guys in for very cheap on day 2, day 3, that can come into a system like this that we know with Turner and Shanahan is going to be friendly to running backs, I think that they have to keep doing it. And I think that it gives them a great succession plan to the point where they're not stuck. They have a contingency. They're not really forced to pay a guy like Mostert who's approaching 30 as he's going to be entering free agency in the offseason. So I'm really high on Elijah Mitchell. I think I would be shocked if he didn't make the team personally.
Yeah, and Jordan took the words right out of my mouth, by the way. I was going to go and not talk about Trey. I actually, for the first 2 practices, the running back that's really caught my eye is Elijah Mitchell. And I don't want to rain on Trey Sermon's parade. I think Trey Sermon can be very productive, but I think we need to pump the brakes a little bit on the idea that Trey Sermon is undoubtedly going to be the bell cow guy or this number 1 guy. I mean, Raheem Mostert's still there. They're working him a little bit gradually. Mitchell offers, we can also talk about his contributions to kick returning. Yesterday, they didn't do any of that. Today, they were doing the kick return, punt return kind of stuff. They had Ambry Thomas. They had Elijah Mitchell. They had Debo. They had Ayuk. They had Sherfield? No. Benjamin too, I think. And so they're going through that. I think Mitchell can prove to be just as good of a running back. And that's the nit that in the draft that I did pick, is that I'm glad to have Trey Sermon on the team. This is no knock on Trey. I do think, and you could say hindsight's 20/20. At the time, trading up, I'm glad Kyle got a guy that he liked. I also feel like Elijah Mitchell in the 6th was there and is going to be that guy, can be that guy too. They're not identical backs, but they have a lot of similarities. And again, Mitchell, what we talked about him, the fact that he wears number 49, and it seems like a weird number. He is a guy that while he has that speed, he can run through you. You watch the Iowa State game. I would just, if anybody can get a hold of any of that tape and go back and watch some of those film, and even if it's highlights, just go see how this is not just some shifty one cut, can't hit contact. I mean, this guy can take it. And so he's the guy that's popped off the screen to me.
Yeah. I think let's remember it's hard to judge these guys in practice. I still like Sermon. What I like about Sermon from when I watched him is just how hard he is to tackle. He always lands on his feet. His center of gravity is so low. isn't it? It's ridiculous. He always spins and lands on his feet. He's like one of those like things that you punch and it keeps landing. Anyway, I like him, and I think he's also has a lot of agility. He kind of reminds me of like Arian Foster a little bit with that upright running style, but he's quick. I think he's good. I mean, Arian Foster was like 230, so he's not quite like that, but I like him. I also like Elijah Mitchell. He kind of reminds me of Breida. He runs hard. He runs fast. He's could be one of the fastest players on the team. All right, Ambry.
That's my guy that I wanted to watch, especially with Emmanuel Mosley being sidelined here. I've actually going to focus on more on his DB drills because they have the DB unit right in front of where we're sitting there. What I've been impressed with is he's not the biggest guy. I mean, he's got height, but he's not, he might not be as yoked as some of these other guys, but he does show off those ball skills. He's got great hands. I think that you're going to see him be your primary returner. I know you've been talking about Brandon Ayuk. I think we all three of us have similar opinions on that.
You think he's going to return punts?
Ambry Thomas?
Yeah.
I think Ambry Thomas is going to be a returner. Yeah.
Okay. Because he returned kicks at Michigan, but not punts.
I get that. And I think that he's going to have an opportunity to show that being a possibility. I don't know.
I know he's fast.
Yeah. I mean, and what I'm saying is put it this way, I think all three of us feel that you should get the ball in the hands of your playmakers whenever you can. I think we all would love to see Brandon Ayuk have the opportunity to have the ball in his hands more often. Mm-hmm. I also think that if Kyle is reluctant to do that, I think that Ambry Thomas is going to be a person that can dovetail right into that position, especially if he's not going to be playing outside a lot right away. In 11 on 11, I haven't seen enough. I have to admit, I'm not going to sit here and I'll focus a little bit more on tomorrow's practice, but I have liked what I've seen in drills, and I think that he's looking pretty fluid. He's looking ready to go, and I like his confidence. I love this dude and his attitude. When he's on the mic. So we'll see what happens tomorrow.
So my whole thing with Thomas is I think he's more of a project, to be honest. I would feel much more comfortable personally with Mosley, Verrett, K1, even Demo Lenore. If there's a rookie who's gonna get a path to snaps first, I think it would be him. But my whole thing is that you have to maximize value, because one thing I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on this as well. I was trying to remember the last time when I really had a hard time projecting the last maybe 20 or so roster spots, because there's so many guys who could make this team, because it's such a deep they have so many good bodies at camp right now. It's such a deep roster that I think there are going to be some positional battles that aren't going to be as easy to project as they have been in recent years. So for a guy like Thomas, I think he has to offer some kind of value as a punt returner, kick returner, gunner on special teams, something there to justify him eating one of those depth corner roles, because I'm not he could have improved a lot. He did sit out this past season, so most of his tape is 2019 and prior to that. But there were some games from there, particularly the one that really stood out to me was when he went up against Chase Claypool, who is an NFL level talent, as we know, in Pittsburgh. Claypool got the better of him. And again, it's just one game, and I don't want to read too much into it, but I think that Thomas is a guy who is on a little bit more of a developmental track. And just based on the picks they've made, the guys they prioritized bringing around, not re-signing Sherman, I think that they are going to lean a little bit more man heavy, or at least run a little bit more man match and do a little bit more than the heavy zone scheme that they've run in recent years. So the majority of what Thomas ran was press man at Michigan. So he is in a position to succeed. I just don't think it's a situation where he's going to be thrust into that role immediately. I do believe he has some development to go through. But if he can offer a role as a returner, he's much more likely to have that roster spot. But he's a guy, like when I saw it there, they have a really deep corner room. I think guys like Tim Harris, Ken Webster, some of these guys, like they're vets who've been around and they can play. So as much as you want to think a guy you spent a third round pick on is a lock for a roster, if he can't offer value as a returner, he's going to have a challenge. It's not just going to be a walk in the park for him to make this roster, in my opinion. He's going to definitely have to earn it.
Well, yeah. I think he'll earn it, but I think he's on the roster. I can't see. I think he was one of their guys, that you talk about when you talk about my guy. I think, he was clearly, a scout's favorite, in the scouting department favorite. And I think that he will contribute in returning. I'd like to see, again, With the pads off, I do feel the offense has the advantage. I really do. And receivers have an advantage. The guys they don't want them jamming. They don't want them, touching. They got to give them a little bit more cushion. We'll see how that, I think we'll get a better evaluation of our DBs the more we go on. But one thing Jordan said is true. I think everybody's kind of been bemoaning the fact that the DB room might be like the weakest unit on the team. And I think they're a little bit deeper and better and if we're looking at safeties, and we're talking about rookies right now, but there's more versatility in that room than I think some fans are recognizing. But like I said, if Mosley falters and Ambry Thomas is asked to contribute, like Jordan said, if there is more development there that's needed, it's going to be an interesting dilemma.
I haven't been impressed with what I've seen from Ambry Thomas yet. It's been a couple of practices, and I'm with Jordan. Like, what are the expectations really? He didn't play last year. He wasn't a top 100 pick. What are the expectations really? I think I like the idea of using him on special teams as giving him like a way to contribute this year. He has height, speed. He could be good down the line, but I don't know. I'm not really impressed with it, really just in the 11 on 11 stuff. So I wouldn't expect much from Ambry Thomas yet. Then there's three more rookies. There's Jalen Moore. I'm interested in him. They have him at left tackle. He's the second team left tackle, not Sean Coleman, not McKivitz. And I mean, I haven't seen enough to tell you how good he is, but they must think something of him to put him there, because they were talking about having him at guard. And maybe they have to put him at left tackle because School got hurt. But that's where Moore's being played. Hufanga. I think a lot of us thought that he might be moved to linebacker. No, he's playing safety. And in a lot of plays, he's like playing single high, which I didn't expect. So they really like him. And then the last guy, Diamador Lenore, haven't seen much from him. I feel like he's been playing on the third team defense. They got Mark Fields ahead of him right now from Clemson. What have you noticed from those three at practice?
I would say that actually of all the DBs, Thomas, Lenore, and Hufanga, the guy that actually stood out to me most in drills was Lenore. And I think the guy I'm most geeked for in the draft out of all those guys was Lenore. And I think that thankfully they have K1 there to helm the slot. But I have been impressed with his fluidity and his movements. I think, he's a bigger guy than you look. He's not the tallest guy, but he's got some physicality to him. And you're right. Like, I think putting him out, I mean, he's a 5th round pick. You put him in the 3rd round or on the 3rd team right now, and we'll see how that goes. I think you'll see him climb the ladder, and I think he might end up being a guy that contributes a little bit more on the field in the secondary than Thomas. As far as Jalen Moore goes, I haven't been able to watch a lot of the one-on-one drills where the D line going against the offensive. So I'm gonna reserve my judgment on Jalen Moore. But Hufanga, so here's a guy I tweet out. I say, hey, first guy on the field, first guy off the field, and the USC fans they run thick, I guess, because like that, like just went on, lit up. But he's that guy. He's that lunch pail guy. He's that John Lynch guy. John Lynch was his guy. John Lynch probably wanted him in the 3rd round. I don't know. One thing we've been talking about with some other guys is that idea that you bring him in to play safety or positionless football. My whole thing with that is, I think that you're going to need to have a little bit more, I guess, quintessential athleticism across the board to be able to fulfill that role. I don't know if Hufanga is that guy. That was the pick of all that I am cheering for that dude. I am rooting for that dude. I'm very interested to see how he conducts himself in practice going forward. I'm interested to see what the coaching staff sees as they look at him as a Swiss Army knife. Jordan, I know you talk about positionless football all the time. Where do you see Hufanga fitting in?
I think he honestly can play that box safety role, and he can take that. I think he can kind of do what Tart has done for them in recent years. I think that he's a guy that if you watch his college tape, his play against the run and his play within the box is far more appealing than when he's isolated in coverage. But I've thought, like Grant pointed out, he was left in single high situations. They definitely weren't trying to hide him. They definitely were giving him every opportunity to prove he could. And he didn't do anything to me that stood out where I was like, oh man, this guy's a liability.
That's what I'm seeing too. He's like instinctual. He knows where to go. He's pretty good.
And there's something
All-American?
I don't know off the top of my head, to be honest. But I know, as a guy who watches a lot of Pac-12 ball, he was a very good player, and I'm surprised he was still on the board where he went. And I think both of you, I saw a tweet from both of you about it. There is really something to be said about being the first guy on the field and the last guy off of it, especially when you aren't, guaranteed. Like it's easy to have that mindset and, say I'm going to be the first guy on, last guy. But when you're actually doing it and you're demonstrating it, I think that goes a long way. And again, you want to have guys on your team like that, these guys are, they're getting paid handsomely, but you want these guys that are going to run through a wall for you. And I think that that's something that John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan have done a really good job, and all the scouting department, all those guys have done a really good job identifying players like that who really do want to buy into this culture and do that. That to me speaks as much as the play on the field, that he really wants this opportunity. So yeah, I see him fitting in great. And I think that the Niners are in a position with him, Tony Jefferson, obviously Ward and Tart. There's so much versatility, and particularly when you have a guy like Jimmy Ward, who's the ultimate chess piece, who can play in the slot, he can play outside, you can line him up at free safety, you can leave him in single high, you can roll out these 3 safety looks, and I think it really gives you a lot of flexibility. So Hufanga is a guy that I'm looking at. I think he absolutely could make the team, and if you end up with 4 safeties, I definitely think having Ward, Tart, Hufanga, and Tony Jefferson is a great start. I don't think they'll carry 5. You could even justify them carrying 5 if they plan on getting a little bit more creative with these defensive sets. But yeah, I'm really excited about him. And then with Jalen Moore, if Jalen Moore can play tackle, because I think he's capable of playing tackle and guard, I think it leaves the 49ers in the ultimate luxury position on the offensive line, because I ultimately do think Aaron Banks will beat out Brunskill. I think Brunskill offers so much more value as a utility guy that can play guard. He's taken reps at all 5 offensive line positions, as far as I know. I know he's at least played guard and center, and he's played both tackle positions. I don't know if he's played left guard, because Tomlinson never misses a snap unless his shoe falls off. But he's a guy that really offers that kind of versatility. So if you have 2 of those between Moore and Brunskill, it leaves you in a very good position, because offensive linemen, as you know, Grant and David, like they're going to get hurt at some point. It's not if, it's when. And if you have 2 guys that can step in at any moment, at any position, it just offers you so much versatility, and you're really maximizing one of those 53 roster spots when you have a guy that can plug that many holes at the same time.
We look at 2019, and it wasn't always pretty, but Justin School and Daniel Brunskill played vital roles in those regular season games, filling in. It wasn't always perfect, but I think the 49ers have shown that their big reason they really like Jalen Moore a lot, and they show that they like versatility. I think versatility is the operative word with the way the 49ers are running. So when you go back to Hufanga, I don't think I think USC fans think he's Ronnie Lott. I think the 49ers are looking at carving out a role for him that's going to be more situational. And I don't think they're going to ask him to come in and eat up a ton of snaps. But here you talk about the over/under. Like, what do you guys think? These rookies, I mean, we have 2 practices in. Is there a chance all these rookies make the squad? I mean, if you roll through, when you go through Trey and Banks, right? You go to Ambry Thomas, your 3rd round pick. He's making the team. Okay. It's Trey Sermon. Okay. Then you're going the 5th round picks. Was it Lenore, Hufanga, and Moore? And then you got Elijah Mitchell. Did I miss anybody?
Nope.
I think there's a really good chance that all those guys are making the squad, and that's on a team that we didn't think had a lot of holes. So if that's the case, that's I mean, to me, at least immediate grades come back. That's a solid draft, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I would think all of them going to make the team. All right, let's move on. We got about 20 minutes left. Who are some of the standouts that you've seen so far that we haven't mentioned?
I mean, I'll start off first. I mean, I'm gonna say Trey Lance is. We talked about it, so we can move on from that. But I will say, to me, Trey Lance legitimately has been the guy that has looked the part. And so I will say that as my 1A. When I'm going with my veteran guys, I'm going to be honest. Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel have come to play. They and George Kittle as well, of course, but these are reliable targets. Brandon Ayuk, he's catching everything. He's all over the field. He means business. He's not rah-rah. He's just going out and doing his work. Deebo looks leaner. Deebo looks more fluid. Deebo looks more, they both look like they're in incredibly good shape. They look like they're taking every rep with high intensity. And I'm excited for that. And I'm also excited to see, I haven't seen, we talk about Jalen Hurd, haven't seen a lot in the 11 on 11s, see where he's at there. I know, Grant, you talked about Sanu, and we're probably going to talk about that. But I think it's a good sign that Ayuk and Deebo are looking like who we thought they would. And those are the guys that stood out the most to me.
No question.
So I had two. One on defense that really stood out to me was the signing they had in free agency, Zach Kerr, who came from the Carolina Panthers, who was a very underrated defender for them, who will be playing interior defensive line. He just looked the part. He's a just massive human being, looked really good in his one-on-one reps. I thought he looked good in the 11-on-11s as well. And then the other guy that really stood out to me was another free agent signing was Trent Sherfield that they picked up from the Cardinals, or former Cardinal. He is a guy that when they first made the signing, like, okay, maybe they're going to address this punt returner, kick returner position, because ultimately I feel like that's an area they haven't really done a great job of addressing. And I think that they have left a guy out there in Richie James at times who looked to me just skittish returning punts ultimately. There's a lot of times where I kind of held my breath where it looked like he wasn't confident seeing the ball in, let alone adding much value as a guy who's going to get you that extra 10 to 15 yards of field position. But the most impressive catch, the Rosen play was probably number one. I'm not going to lie. That was the most impressive overall play of the day I saw. But the most impressive individual play I saw was Sherfield made a one-handed catch when the receivers were off on the far end of the field. And he was running across his body and made a leaping catch going up, running across his body to the left side of the field. And he jumped up with his right hand and pulled down a ball where he was a couple feet in the air. And it was just so fluid. It kind of set out. I'm like, oh, like, who made that catch? I'm looking up and I see 81. I'm like, wow, this is Trent Sherfield. So if he's a guy that can consistently make catches like that and can add some kind of impact where he's definitely a speed guy, and if Kyle can get him in space, I could easily see him making the roster as that maybe fifth, I don't know if they're going to carry six, but fifth or sixth wide receiver who also could be that returner. So those would probably be my two guys.
Yeah, to me, like the standout so far, it's real clear. It's Debo and it's Ayuk. Those guys are killing it. No one can cover him. George Kittle's an all-pro player. He's having a quiet camp. I don't read into it, but I definitely want to give props to Debo and Ayuk. There's no, I mean, Fred Warner too, but there's only, if a middle linebacker can't tackle, you're not going to see him as much. These two guys can definitely express most of what they do without contact. I also want to highlight the defensive tackles, but we're going to get to the defensive linemen in a minute, so I'll hold off. But I just wanted to underscore, I don't go on like my daily good, not so good, and just say every day Debo. I could though. I just feel like people want to know other names and other faces. And today I did watch the one-on-ones very closely, and I was really impressed with like every defensive tackle on the team. Honestly, they're all really good. Chris Kostrick does a really good job. But we're going to talk about that in a minute. Any other standouts you want to mention before we move on?
I mean, those one I would reiterate as a segue into that. Zach Kerr, day one, is a guy that looks like the best shape of his career. He had his helmet off in those drills. Everybody else had their helmet on. He's helping the young guys. He looks light on his feet. That rotation between Mo Hurst and Zach Kerr. I mean, one thing Jordan and I were talking about today on the Bleed is that 2019 roster, solid. This defense and that rotational interior has the opportunity to absolutely be a better defense, to be on par better. Now, feel about the D Ford. I honestly, wherever D Ford is at this year is just gravy. That edge depth is going to be something that might come up. But as far as the interior line, I'm telling you, they're going to come in waves. And somebody's going to be on the outside looking in, and there's going to be a good NFL player that's going to get scooped up right away that gets cut, because there's not going to be room for everybody.
I agree. It could be Darian Daniels. I like Darian Daniels.
I do too.
I'm a Darian Daniels fan. I like his music. I don't know what to say. I like his catalog. Sorry. Office Space.
Well played.
Jordan, please. I want to hear what you have to say about the D line.
Okay, so I've been doing a lot of thinking about this recently, and as we know, that 2019 defensive line for me is on the short list of best front four of all time. When you had Ford, Bosa, Buckner, and Armstead all rushing the passer in that turbo set, we saw them just devour quarterbacks and good offensive lines over the course of the season. The thing that's getting me now, though, is that while they're not as strong at the top, they have so much depth and they've put so much emphasis on addressing the interior. I'm starting to wonder, well, it's also easier to acquire interior players on the market for a little, slightly less, depending on the skill level, than you would pay an edge guy. I'm thinking that the Niners made a concerted effort to generate more pressure up the middle, because ultimately, if you look at the data, if you hear the testimonials of quarterbacks, if you look at a guy like Tom Brady, had 7 rings, and the Super Bowls that he did lose, it was when the opposing team was able to just absolutely wreak havoc up the middle. I thought that while a lot was made about Shaq Barrett and Devin White. I thought Vita Vea was the best
Vita
player on
Vea
that
was
defense in the
really
Super
good.
Bowl.
He
He was incredible.
Yep.
So I'm looking at the Niners and I'm wondering, are they starting to, kind of zig while everyone's zagging and paying all these edge guys? And the Niners are like, hey, we have a transcendent talent in Nick Bosa. We might get half a season out of D Ford. We can give, Samson Ebukam a reasonable market rate. Let's just load up on bodies on the inside. Let's get these the old cliche get off the bus test where you see these guys and it's just an intimidating group coming off. That Niners D-line, particularly on the interior, is just massive. And I'm starting to wonder if maybe this really is a concerted effort where they're like, instead of going out and spending a bunch of money on a Jadeveon Clowney or, we know Melvin Ingram was on the market. Let's get a Zach Kerr. Let's get a Maurice Hurst. Let's get an Arden Key. Let's get some of these guys at a cheaper rate and just have, while it may not be as strong at the top, have wave after wave of good pass rushers. Like the first team unit that I saw today was Bosa, Kinlaw, DJ Jones, and Eric Armstead. And then the secondary unit was D Ford, Kevin Givens, Zach Kerr, and Samson Ebukam. And that second unit could be the first unit for a large portion of the NFL. So I think that the Niners have just done a really good job of, kind of sacrificing maybe that top end talent, especially after they did invest so much money and capital between Ford and Bosa and some of these guys. And they're just kind of taking the quantity. I don't want to say quantity over quality because there's a lot of quality players there, but they're valuing the depth over the top end talent. And I think it's a lesson they learned after that depth thinned out. And it kind of was like a car running out of gas right before the finish line. I felt that's how the 2019 season went because they didn't have that depth. So I think they've done a really good job setting themselves up for like almost insurance, if you will, with that unit.
Well, I think fans also do talk about, hey, we got to get edge depth. I mean, people don't understand, like guys, talents like Nick Bosa are generational guys. I mean, you're not going to find a replica. Like if Nick Bosa has to come off the field, you're not going to replace him with an identical player. And I think one of Bill Belichick's strategies is always to look at positions and say, hey, positions of value that you're going to have to pay a lot, like an edge rusher. Let's accumulate players like Jordan was said in the interior, or as Belichick would do with even off-ball linebackers, other guys like that are really quality players that you bring in ways that you have depth that take pressure off those guys that are on the edge as well. And say, hey, we have more good players than you do on this defense. And like you said, I think oftentimes we always focus on the sexy edge, but like the idea of the interior pressure is incredibly important and sometimes even more important. And so I don't think it's hyperbole at all to say if these guys can stay healthy, and I'm not even like looking at D Ford right now, if they can stay healthy across the board in the defensive line, of course, that's all contingent on Bosa. But if Bosa stays healthy, and they got that defensive line rotation, this is going to be a scary team because right behind him, of course, Grant, you already talked about Fred's been having Fred's Fred. Well, the last 2 days he's been great. I mean, he is who he is. This team, another of my guys, Jimmy Ward was a standout. I felt last 2 days. I love Jimmy. And it's like this is a scary defense. And if those corners, if Jason Verrett can play and Mosley can just be themselves, and Mosley can have that little bit of improvement, this team is going to be tough.
I'm really impressed with with the defensive tackles. To me, I look at what Chris Kosterick has done with Kentavious Street, DJ Jones, Kevin Givens, and now bringing in Zach Kerr. They're all similar to me. They're all very strong. They're all very low to the ground. They're all very explosive. They shoot into a gap and they cause problems. And I like the way all four of them play. I think they're all disruptive. I don't know if they can give you 900 snaps, but they don't have to. You can play all of them. My thing here is, where does Javon Kinlaw fit in? I mean, he does certain things well, and he's very big, but they have these guys, and Kinlaw's hurt. And I would actually like to see Kinlaw next to all of them in the one-on-one pass rush drills because I haven't seen anything from Kinlaw in that. Like he goes upright. He doesn't really fire into a gap. He's not much of a pass rusher. Now, he was just a rookie. It's too bad that he's hurt. I'd like to see what Chris Kosterick has done with. I assume that he's better, but that's the only thing that's on my mind here with the D line. Like, where does Kinlaw factor in here? And he's not going to take snaps away from someone who's better than him, is he? I hope not, because Ambry Thomas used to do that routinely, and it wasn't his fault; it was the coach's fault.
And I don't think the coaches are. I mean, maybe you've heard different, Grant, but yeah, I kind of got over like the injury. It's like he's still going through. It's not like they got him sitting in a brace, like sitting on the sideline doing nothing. I mean, he's still going through the drills. I think if they were that concerned about it, they just have him completely sidelined. And so let's just see what happens next week. I think Kinlaw's for sure. I think Kinlaw's going to take a big leap this year. That's my breakout guy. And I think
I'm not betting against him.
No, and I think that the complementary players around him are going to let him thrive. And I think he's one of those guys that, he's going to make mistakes, but he is one of those guys that has the biggest potential to make those incredible impact plays that swing drives. And I think that, like you said, I don't think the coaches are going to have this political hierarchy where they say, hey, if this guy's playing better than you, you were the first round pick, that you're not going to sit. I don't see that. I don't think D'Amico Ryans is going to operate that way. But I'm really eager to see how he looks when they put pads on and his knees back to where it needs to be.
So in defense of Javon Kinlaw, real quick, I will say, I know people didn't see the sack numbers they wanted. He had huge shoes to step in or to fill in for with the departure of DeForest Buckner, obviously. If you go back and you watch his tape at South Carolina, he's 6'5", 330 pounds, I believe. He just bullied opposing offensive linemen, and he was doing it to SEC offensive linemen. But even this quality of the conference as that is, they're not NFL offensive linemen. And I think he's had a rougher transition when it comes to rushing the passer, because he was so used to roughing up these offensive linemen with a bull rush that he didn't really have a secondary move that I noticed. And I think that's something that hopefully he has worked on in this offseason.
No doubt.
I
think what I saw last year is a guy who was genuinely surprised that he couldn't do what he did in college. He's like, oh, snap. Like, Laken Tomlinson fights back? Wow. It's like, yeah, man, Laken Tomlinson's first-round pick too, dude. So, yeah, he needs a counter. He needs a plan, because it was easy for him in college. You're right.
And I would add this. So my whole thing, and I don't want to, have this come across as I'm slandering DeForest Buckner. He was a great player, a great 49er. He was a phenomenal pass rusher, but he was always a finesse guy. And I thought that the 49ers were very susceptible to rushes up the teams attacked him consistently running the ball up the middle. And the 49ers went from
cut 3 technique, man.
Mm-hmm. And they went
6'8".
Yeah. And they went from 17th in rushing yards allowed in Buckner's last year in 2019 to last season in Javon Kinlaw's rookie year. They were 7th. So they went from middle of the pack to a top 10 rushing defense. And I think Kinlaw eating up so much of the middle had a lot to do with that. And then to add on to what you said, Grant, I think they've put themselves in a great position where you can have Kinlaw play a role where instead of kind of being focused more on rushing the quarterback, he can instead eat up space in the middle, take on a guard and center at the same time because he's so big. And then you leave a guy like a Zach Kerr, a DJ Jones, a Maurice Hurst, who has a little bit more of a pass rushing bag. They're getting one-on-one opportunities then because of them. So I think that the players they've put around Kinlaw are going to make him it's going to make life much easier for him on the interior, even if he's not a guy that's just going to jump into double-digit sacks.
Yeah, that's a good call. And what I want to say about Kinlaw, again, I'm not slandering him either. It's just, it's comes with the territory of being a first-round pick, basically. I mean, people are hard on most first-round picks. The thing with him is he is a good run defender. He's a hell of a run defender. He's a really good athlete. But he's always going to be judged based on his pass rush because he's a first-round pick, and that's what we're talking about here. So I'm not saying he can't take a leap. You just laid out, why he was the way he was last year and where he's working from. But makes sense. He just needs to get on the field because the time is now. And if he keeps missing time, I don't know. I mean, it just seems like eventually he's going to be in a situation where he's like bone on bone in that knee. And hopefully the Niners get the best years, and it's a few years down the line. I don't know if he's going to be getting a second contract, but that's really not the Niners' problem right now. They just need to get him on the field now. And if he is surrounded by Ford, Armstead, and Bosa, he should get some really good matchups. I mean, I know he can bully a center. If he could get a one-on-one matchup with a center, he could just destroy that guy. So, yeah, there's hope for sure.
No, and I think DJ Jones is that one guy that we glossed over. We talked about Zach Kerr, but DJ, when he's had his health issues too, right? If he's healthy and there's a guy that Kinlaw taking up space, that's that guy with that, like you talk about that pass rush bag. That's that guy that explosive interior rush. I mean, that's where I feel like this team is going to complement each other. And I don't think any one of those guys are stat patters or looking to kind of like be those guys that has to compile this or be all pro. This is just they're going to come at you in waves. And so my thing is, we're 2 practices in, nobody's been hurt. And that's the first step. I think Kinlaw is going to come back, and I think Kinlaw is going to come back healthy here in camp. So,
hey, let's speak it into existence. David, Jordan, we're out of time. This was a lot of fun. Thank you for joining me on my channel and sharing your insights from practice. The people needed to know. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, brother.
All right.
Thank you
everyone for watching. Hold on, let me make sure. Hold on. I think there was some super chats I missed. Hold on. Raymond says, "My bad, Raymond. I wasn't going to take you. I wasn't going to take your money. Who's going to lock up the special teams returner positions? The special teams unit is the weak link. Does it improve this season?" They're saying Ambry. You guys think it's gonna be Ambry? Real quick
I
before
think
we
it's gonna
go.
be I think it's gonna be Sherfield. Actually, I think he ends up getting a roster spot.
Yeah,
Man,
I
that's
think
exciting.
I do think it's Ambry Thomas, and I think I'm hoping IU gets a couple looks, but yeah.
I'm keeping my fingers crossed for Trent Sherfield. I want to watch that. Please, Kyle, give the people what they want. No, I'm serious. Just kidding. Sorry, Trent, if you're watching. All right, guys. I'll be back tomorrow, day 3. Thanks, everyone.